There's this trauma that happened to you when you were small, mostly at home with your family. And then there's this kind of trauma we hardly ever talk about that much, and that's the trauma that happened when you were a teenager. The stuff that really hurt you deeply, sometimes by your family, yeah, but it was also hurts from your neighbors, your teachers, other kids, like probably mostly other kids, your first boyfriend or girlfriend, or the lack of having a boyfriend or girlfriend, getting rejected. And so, somebody had asked me about this question, and while I was thinking the stuff that happens to kids, it's bad and it can affect brain development, but so can things that happen to teenagers. And it's hard to even think about sometimes because you know what? A lot of it is stuff that was happening to you, but the introduction of the idea that you had some control over it begins to appear on the horizon. We were all doing the best we could, but sometimes there were mistakes we made in thinking and in how we chose to act on certain struggles we were having. And you can look back and think how you do it differently. So I was thinking if I could go back and talk to my teenage self, back when I didn't always have somebody to teach me or protect me or teach me how to do life, is there anything I could say that could have made it better? And I think there is. And I wanted to share with you 10 things that I'd like to go back and say to 15-year-old Anna. And then I invite you to think about what you would say to yourself at some point in your teenage years as well. All right, here's the things that I would like to say to myself that I think would have made a difference. Number one, you're beautiful exactly as you are. You don't have to try so hard. And if you actually just let your beauty shine, you're going to find that people like you, including boys. Number two, I would tell myself to try to get to know my biological dad before he died. My dad died when I was 15. He was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease when I was 13. And my parents had gotten divorced when I was 7, so already I only saw him on weekends. When I was 9, with my mom and stepdad, my family moved out of state. And so from the ages of 9 to the time he died when I was 15, I only got to see him on Christmas, Easter, and summer, if everything went well. And we got to see him, so our time with him was limited. And it's a really tough illness. We knew for certain he would die in about 2 years, which he did. As his illness progressed, there was stuff going on like with feeding tubes and a tracheotomy and his loss of speech, and he would get very emotional. I don't think he was like over emotional. He just would let us see him cry. He was so sad that he wasn't going to get to stay in our lives and be our dad. I love him for that. And he went to a lot of trouble actually and wrote me letters about what his experience had been like, being sick as a kid, at work, things that he had worked on, patents that he had gotten at work, because he knew that as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, I wasn't going to be able to take that information in and that one day I would want to know. And so I treasure these letters from him, and he gave that to me. But I wish when I was 15, and this is just hypothetical because I just didn't have it, but the way that he loved me so much and the way he was trying to have the closeness with me of a lifetime between a father and daughter, all in these little tiny visits, it was intense. It was like this huge Klieg light shining in my face, like drinking from a fire hose. It was too much. And I felt awkward, I felt embarrassed, and I would tend to kind of look the other way and not want to hang out with him. I regret that. I simultaneously have a lot of compassion for myself that I couldn't deal with it, but I just wish that I had used that time to get to know him a little bit as a person. It wasn't long before everybody who had known him and everyone who had known me as a child, there are almost none of them still alive. And that's what happens in a family where there's a lot of alcoholism and drug addiction, is people don't always last that long, not very many of them. And I just wish I had gotten to know him. I'm having to piece it together from these letters. All right, the third thing I would like to go tell myself at 15 is that my mom is an alcoholic. And she's not around anymore. But when I was younger, I think I was 12 the first time it began to dawn on me that what was going on, the chaos, the strange behavior, the way our family wasn't like other families, we were really poor. I thought that was just intrinsically what we were, was poor. But a lot of our poverty and chaos was because of her alcoholism. And I wish I had had a better understanding of that at 15, and so that I could understand that she has this disease and she can't help it. And if she could, she would be a better mother, but she couldn't. And I think she felt very ashamed of that. I interpreted the way she shied away from that, the way she wouldn't deal with that question or show up for us in the way that we needed. I took that very personally as a rejection. But I understand that so much of that was just common with alcoholism. All right. Number 4, I would tell myself to go find an adult to mentor me about school and life and college. That is one thing. I was a bright kid, and even though my parents were educated, because of the alcoholism, they were very preoccupied. And I had very little idea about how you navigate from high school into the future. And people just assumed that I was taken care of. I tried to look good at school. I'm this little white girl. Everybody thinks the parents are covering that. But actually what happened was I graduated a year early with honors. I walked over to the university in town in August, and I just said, I'm ready to go here now. And they said, well, do you have, where's your SAT? Where's your application? I'm like, what's an application? What's an SAT? And for anybody who's not from the US back then, the SAT is the test that every high schooler takes, and they use the number to help decide if you can go to this school or that school. I didn't even know about it. So I lost a whole semester while I, filled out an application and went and took the SAT, which I did without studying, because I also didn't know you were supposed to or how to do that. I lacked a lot of guidance. So if I could tell myself something, I would say, just go find an adult. Our neighborhood was full of great people who did have bandwidth to help with things like that. And I encourage everybody who needs some help taking their next step, even if you're well older than a teenager, is to ask for mentorship from somebody. People usually like to offer that help if they possibly can. And you don't have to figure this all out by yourself and lose semesters or whole decades of your life because you didn't know how to access that next step for yourself. Number 5 is, I would say, stick with and value the people you meet, because I did meet them, but stick with them and make them first in your life, the people who are kind and the people who are into things. I've realized that one of the ways that I was very lucky as a young person is I encountered, a lot through my family, people who were really, really into things. And to this day, I just think whatever people's passions and interests are, if they're really into it, I delight in being around them. I love people who are interesting and interested and passionate about things. And that with kindness is good. One of the things I did out of low self-esteem or feeling like I didn't fit in anywhere, or that, feeling that the way that I felt bad about myself inside, projecting that other people saw me that way too, is I would hang out with people who were into not very much, like people who just like to sit around and watch TV and smoke pot, basically. And also people who weren't necessarily very kind. I did know kind people, but I if I could go back in time, I'd go and put those people first. Number 6, I would tell myself at 15 to commit to the creative work that I loved and not be afraid that doing that creative work was not going to lead to a career. I was terrified because I had grown up poor that I had to do something practical or I would never be okay. And I would just say, after going through life, like, having a paycheck is something you can usually put together if your problems are not too great. So whether you choose to go into like theater versus accounting, yes, you will have more money with accounting at first. But basically, either way, you're going to be able to get a job if you have like some basic abilities and you can show up for work on time. And that difference is not that wide. If you can support yourself and survive, youth is a great time to be creative. I was really into theater at that time, and there are several junctures I could say in my life where, I was doing comedy, I was doing improv theater, I made a film, but I always had this total fear that if I gave my energy to these things, that I would just end up out on the streets. I had this deep fear of ending up homelessness, and I think that was a legacy of some of the times when things were very haywire in my early childhood, and we didn't have food. And so I just couldn't really give myself over. And I wish I hadn't. I wish I had seen those things through just as far as I could go with those creative endeavors. But it's never too late. I'm talking to you right here in a creative endeavor, and it feels great. So it came around. The 7th thing that I would tell myself as a 15-year-old is, you do not need a boyfriend or sex. these relationships at 15 are not going to last. Maybe they did for some people, but they sure didn't for me. The relationships ultimately are not important, and they're a distraction, and the chasing of boys is only coming out of trauma, and it's actually making my relationships quite unhealthy. That's probably the biggest area where I sabotaged my own success in life. I got accepted into an exchange program to go live in another country in 10th grade, and I declined because a boyfriend who had broken up with me maybe was going to take me back, and I didn't want to miss that opportunity. And I also, for a boyfriend once, declined to accept the lead role in a play that was being put on by the drama department in my high school. Right at the beginning of 9th grade, I get into high school, I get the lead in a play. That would have been great for me socially because I thought I was an outcast, and that would have helped me to make some friends. And I was like, no, because, there's this boy I like, and I wanted to be around hanging out with him. And I feel bad about that, and I used to judge myself harshly, and now that I understand CPTSD, it's just like, for me to hold myself together emotionally and psychologically at all, I just needed to try to hold on to love anywhere I could get it. But as many of us found out through, precocious romance in our teen years, you don't end up getting the love you want. I think it's extremely rare. You end up getting left, and then that becomes even harder. So for me, I had those years between, in like 9th grade, 10th grade. That's when my dad was dying. That's when I was finding out that the whole romance thing wasn't going to feed me. It wasn't going to give me anything that lasted. And it led to a really deep depression. So that's what I would do differently. I don't think there's any way I could have reasoned with me at 15 and changed my mind about this. I was like dead set. I just thought this having this boyfriend is going to just totally fix my life. The way that ended up being demeaning and tragic for me set me up for a pattern that was very, very difficult for many years until I recovered. But I did. We always can. Another thing I wish I could go back and tell myself is to eat real food, not diet food. So whereas a lot of teenagers ate a lot of junk food, I was so worried about my weight all the time. And so I was always eating these bizarre foods like liquid protein and popcorn with no oil, like huge amounts of it or something, or salad bars at Wendy's. You can't do this anymore. But they would give you like a plastic clamshell case and a bag, and we'd go to Wendy's and go to the salad bar and lay that tray like in the bottom of the bag with a bit of salad in it, and then just start shoveling in salad. And we'd ask for a little cup for the dressing, and they'd give you like a small drink cup, and we fill it up with dressing. And then we go home and like eat salad for 4 hours, which basically is binging, and it's not nutritious. And it was a pattern of overeating that was kind of helping me spin out into more and more hunger and self-hatred. And one of the things that really helped me is one day when I learned to just start eating real food. And I gave myself permission to eat whatever I wanted. And for a while, it ended up being candy or, something that I just wanted. But gradually it settled down. Gradually it settled down when I got real food, and I just realized that all through my teenage years, I was in a lot of brain fog and exhausted because I was malnourished. I was fasting, I was doing weird diets where you don't eat anything but grapefruit. I was in this medical program where you got shots of vitamin B all the time. It was just bogus. And there were times when I was sort of passing out from hunger. And thankfully, I didn't develop any kind of chronic eating disorder. Many people do. So eventually that sorted itself out. But just for the sake of my own health and being able to show up for my life, I would like to have gone in and influenced myself to eat real food. All right, number 9, I would have encouraged myself to be open to all kinds of people at school, including people who seemed happy and popular. The people I avoided were the ones who seemed happy and popular because I just had this deep fear that they were better than me and that they looked down on me. I think a lot of people relate to that. But I had a chance when Facebook came out. Eventually, I just kind of like left town right after high school, and I never stayed friends with anybody. And then I went back to a reunion and started making friends with people, and they were delightful. And I had conversations and learned that I absolutely could have been friends with people. But I just had a lot of fear that I was an unacceptable person. And I'm really sorry I wasted my youth feeling that way. I could have had some fun. One of the things that blocked me, though, is because I felt people were looking down on me, I looked down on them, and I tended to badmouth people. And that's terrible. I thought that was cool to just be like, oh, they're yuppies and they're preppies, and I just look down on people. And those people are a drag, people who look down on others. Number 10, and I probably feel the most strongly about this one as something that would have made a difference, is I would have told myself, not that I would have listened to myself, but I would have told myself to stay away from drug culture. I had grown up in a culture that was full of alcohol and drugs, that was full of ways of justifying or denying that. And by some miracle, I never really got that into alcohol or drugs, but I did get into people who were into alcohol and drugs. I think they were comfortable for me. I felt not judged by them. They were people that I could bring home, into a household where it was quite obvious some weird stuff was going on. And so I'm grateful for the friendship of people who did accept me, but the thing is, some of the friends who were most into drugs ended up in serious trouble. And I had to make a decision at a certain point. I made the decision at 19 to get out of town and reset my life. I believe I would have benefited from having more friends who were a little more solid, who were planning to go to college, who were following through on goals, who were working jobs, who are taking steps that people can take when they're not in the throes of addiction. And that's what we do, is we sort of match ourselves to the people around us. But instead I was matching myself to people who were sort of abandoning all those things. And by contrast, I could see myself as this great achiever, but I really was falling so far short of what I really wanted to be doing and what I was really capable of. And I think that spending that many more years immersed in drug culture ended up giving me even deeper crap fit. That's the word I use when we develop a skill to sort of fit ourselves to a crappy situation, of being able to just overlook just complete dysfunction around myself. And I think in youth and teenage years, it is really important who you hang out with. So you want people who are kind, who are curious, who are into things, right? Who are eating healthy food and modeling that for you, and who know how to get into college. So even if you can't learn it from your parents, your friends can tell you about things like the SAT. So those are 10 things that I would have liked to have been able to go back in time and tell myself, because I have a fantasy that it could have made a difference. In reality, life ended up giving me opportunities, sometimes not on the timeline that I would have liked, but eventually I had the opportunity to heal. And I'm sitting here before you now benefiting from all of that. So I'm grateful for all the people who showed up along the way and helped me. And I find it helpful sometimes to notice that there are 5 or 6 of these things that would have helped me when I was 15 that would still help me if I would let them in as lessons today. You might find the same thing if you make your own list of things you wish you could tell yourself when you were a teenager. If talking about your teenage self has gotten you thinking about things that would have helped you live more fully all along, I've got a video lined up for you that will help you look now at why maybe you continue to play small. You can watch that right here, and I will see you very soon.